Hello, I'm Robert Martinez, State Historian of New Mexico, and this is New Mexico History in 10 minutes. From about 1600 until 1625, the Spanish colony in New Mexico is on shaky ground. Juan de Onate, the adelantado of the expedition and colony, has been sent to Mexico City by 1607 to face charges of abusing Indians, abusing colonists, and immorality, as well as false reporting. So he's in trouble down south. The colony itself is on shaky ground. There's only about 50 families here, and there's a lot of conflict between governors and Franciscan priests that will result in a catastrophic events about 3 generations later. By 1610, La Villa Real de la Santa Fe de San Francisco de Asís is established. That's Santa Fe. And it's the only Spanish community in the area surrounded by pueblos who are still deciding whether they want to live with Spaniards, coexist with them. But coexist they do. A certain convivencia is put in place, a coexistence that will endure for about 3 generations. Around 1625, when Alonso de Benavides comes as the head or custos of the Franciscans, he is the official agent of the Inquisition in New Mexico. And he reads edicts of faith in the church in Santa Fe and starts to take down accusations about colonists. So this is a great record we have, one of the few records of the period that show what life was like here in New Mexico. And it's quite amazing. There's a lot of superstition, a lot of accusations of blasphemy, of witchcraft and sorcery, and bigamy. And what we see happening is that the priests are wrestling with evangelizing the Pueblo people and also keeping the Hispanic people in line and following the Catholic faith that is handed down from Mexico City and from Spain and, of course, from Rome. Well, that's ideally what should have happened, but in reality, up until about the mid-1600s, what you see in New Mexico is a syncretized blending of Catholicism and Pueblo spiritual beliefs and superstition. What's fascinating, though, for me, is what the priests have to say and what the governors have to say about the people. Fray Alonso de Benavides, one of the things he did was take all the Kachina statues from the kivas and burn them. It was a statement that Catholicism is the one true faith and no other religious expression would be accepted. On the one hand, Native Americans were not under the jurisdiction of the Inquisition, but people like Fray Alonso de Benavides and his successors would find ways to go after Pueblo religious expression. Part of the issue was the perception that the Franciscans had, which was this. They felt that they were in an imminent battle with the devil and that all of these native practices and spiritual expressions were demonic, that the devil had these people in his grip and it was their job to wrestle them from that demonic activity and Christianize them. So this is what's going on in New Mexico. And as you can imagine, from the perspective of the Pueblos, it was not pleasant. They had their own religion when the Spanish came. They had their own system of governing themselves. And the Spanish brought their way of doing things and imposed it. And this conflict that you see between the priests and the governors, part of the problem was that the viceroy in Mexico City never made it clear who had authority. I mean, after the debacle with Onate at the beginning of the colonization process, New Mexico essentially became a ward of the Spanish state and was put under the authority of the Catholic Church. It became known as La Conversación de San Pablo, the conversion of St. Paul. And the reason that this is significant is because what you get is this back and forth battle. Governors come up here, they look down on the local population, they feel it's their right to make money, to get wealth here, And what happens is they start to tell the Pueblo people, well, you can do your dances. You can go into your kivas as long as you give me fanegas of corn, you give me blankets, you work for me. So they would do that, and then the Franciscans would hit back at the Pueblos really hard and punish them for doing their dances and praying in their kivas, having their spiritual practices there. So they were like children caught between parents who were getting a divorce, and it got pretty bad over the years. And the problem starts to evolve as there are issues with the encomienda. The encomienda is a system of economic domination that needs to be discussed. It's very medieval. It's the old lord and vassal system you see in Europe in the Middle Ages. And what it is the Spaniards would put themselves at the top as the encomenderos, and they would be the lord, and the Pueblos would be put in the role of being vassals, people who had to work, pay tribute in the form of goods and labor. And it was a form of servitude in its own way. And the Pueblo people were accommodating of this. But again, we'll see after about 3 generations of all of these problems, it becomes a real issue. Now, I want to talk about religion because the Catholic Church is the dominating religion. It's the state religion of the Spanish at that time. And there was no tolerance of other religions, not only native religions. There was no tolerance of being Jewish or Muslim or anything in the Spanish realms. If you've ever traveled in Mexico, I've been all over Mexico. I love traveling down there. I feel a connection there, just like when I go to Spain. I was outside of Mexico City one time en route to Puebla, and I was in these huge mountain ranges. It's overwhelming. You get ansias, you get anxiety. They're so big and beautiful and overwhelming. And I remember seeing these hills with a little white Catholic church out at the foot of the mountains. And I wondered what those were. Well, I talked to some people around there, and they said, those aren't mountains. Those are piramides. Those are pyramids. And what the Catholic Spaniards did when they conquered Mexico, what they would do was build a church on top of the pyramid, because the pyramid was where the local Indians would go to worship their gods. So this had a twofold effect. Number one, it told them the one true Catholic faith is here and dominating the old religion and the old gods. And it also was a way of enticing the native people to come to church. In other words, by saying, look, we have our church, but it's where you used to worship anyway. So just come on over to where you used to worship and come on up and be Catholic. Well, yes and no. This was syncretism, again, this blending of Catholicism with native religion. And what it results in is a population that is not completely catechized or Christianized. And I've often wondered about New Mexico, especially in the 1600s. If you look at the ruins of the old Franciscan churches at Cuaray, over at Salinas, or at Jemez, or any of these pueblos, and you see how huge these churches are. We still have them at Acoma and Picuris, or the amazing church at Las Trampas. The huge walls, they're 6 feet thick, they're tall, they're amazing. Well, apparently the native people did most of the hard labor for these churches. So you have to wonder why this happened. There had to be some sort of, again, accommodation, convivencia. So I have to think that maybe these priests were thinking like their counterparts down in Mexico to build these churches either on top of or adjacent to a kiva, where there was a lot of mixing going back and forth, because there are reports from governors criticizing the Franciscans for allowing such mixing of Catholicism with native beliefs and practices. And even the priests, when you look at the Inquisition documents, you see that they almost give up dealing with this blending of Hispanic and Native American Puebloan superstitions and what they considered to be witchcraft and sorcery, but were often folk healing, curanderismo going on. So this is what's going on in New Mexico in the 1600s. And it all starts to boil over by about the 1670s. Let's be very clear here. The Pueblos were not passive players. They were participants in this history as workers, as warriors, as governors, as communities that interacted with Hispanics. But still, they were also being exposed to some very difficult economic, political, and religious pressures. So we're going to see what happens between 1670 and 1680 in New Mexico after about 3 generations of Spanish domination. I'll see you next time. Adios.